Welcome to All Things Moore County, Moore County's weekly radio show highlighting the many facets of the Sandhills. That includes real estate, lifestyles, community, and neighborhoods. And now, from 4 Properties, here's your host, Bill Sahadi.
Good morning and welcome to the talk show, All Things Moore County. We're going to be speaking for a large part of the show today with the executive director of Friend to Friend, Ann Friesen, and Chandler Thornton, Nicole Bennett, and Jan Mullis, all about the good work that Friend to Friend does, and the fact that January is there. Actually, I'm going to let Ann talk about this, but there's a program called 1,000 Eyes Wide Open that has to do with human trafficking, and they'll be on in the second and third set. Before we go in that direction, we have a friend who has joined us that I think a lot of you probably know, and you know the publication that she owns and writes for, called the Pinehurst Gazette. And I'm speaking about Rebekah King, which I guess, Rebekah, is your pen name for all the articles that you write for people who come into town. When I first came here in 1979, I remember picking up a copy of the Pinehurst Gazette, and it still has the look and the feel of yesteryear, and yet the articles and the content has shifted a little bit. For those who are familiar, the Pinehurst Gazette is probably best known for the incredibly good maps that are put into the center of the publication, and it's a quarterly publication. I want to first say good morning. It's great to see you.
Good morning.
And
good
I know you have a cold like
yes.
everybody else, and everyone's fighting through their voices and their coughs, but I'm glad you were able to come in.
Thank you for having me.
The Gazette started in 1973, didn't it?
It did. It's going into its 46th year of publication.
How did you get to, tell me the story, because it evolved from the time it started, the original owner, and...
Yes, it's an incredible story. It started with Mr. Reid Page, which is the perfect name for a newspaper.
Right.
So Mr. Page started it in 1973, and his heritage is the Page family in Aberdeen, who sold the land to the Tufts family. So there's a lot of heritage and a lot of history. In about 2011, he started calling me, asking me to purchase the paper.
How did you know him? How did you all know each other?
Well, I grew up in Southern Pines, and so this is home. So I've known him practically all my life from being downtown Southern Pines.
I didn't know you grew up in Southern Pines.
Yes.
I did not. Okay.
Yes.
Learn
so this
something
is
new every
home.
day.
Moore County is home. So owning the Gazette is a complete privilege. But Reid kept calling me. He was going to retire at age 87, and he was going to get his wife situated in Florida. So anyway, he kept calling me. He had read a few things that I had written over the years and wanted me to continue the paper.
Okay. So writing has always been a passion of yours?
It has. It's kind of developed into that out of necessity.
Well, as this has evolved, this has become truly a family-owned business.
Yes.
And you've now been running it for how many years?
For 7. I bought it in January 2012. So I'm the second owner, and yes, my 5 sons are completely involved in the paper.
Yeah. What are the ages of your sons?
Currently 19, 17, 15, 12, and 10.
And all industrious and all helping mom?
All completely incredible.
Learning the business. So it's really
Yes.
a very organic exercise to get it out every quarter.
Yes, 100% local, 100% hometown. It's a complete privilege.
The look of the Gazette is no different today than it was when I first saw it in 1979, and I loved going through it. It was one of those publications I loved to sit down over a cup of coffee and read, because I was like completely showered with the history of Pinehurst, the area. I think golfers who have been here, who have made the sojourn here, all remember and probably have a souvenir copy at home, and that's what it looks like, a keepsake.
Right. Yes, and I've intentionally kept it that way to preserve the charm and the local history. And it's interesting that you said when you moved here in 1979, that's what you picked up.
Right.
I still meet people all the time who say it's the first thing I've read. And when they moved to the area, they carry it around, as
That's
you
right.
said, for the maps.
That's right.
But I've intentionally left it the elongated black and white to stand out amongst the sea of 4-color publications that we have. So
I wish I could tell people, I was born in 1979 and nobody would believe me, right? But so here's the thing. Since I moved here in 1999, I've seen the demographics change so much in Moore County that your readership today, you've got 5 different generations living in Moore County.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Back when Reid started in the 70s and the 80s, it was not like that. It was more of just a retirement community. So that sort of puts a little bit more pressure on you to find the kind of human interest stories and the information that would appeal not just to the civic generation, but to the generations that came after them.
Right. Yes, and I feel qualified. Well, I don't feel qualified to do that, but having my sons and being the younger generation coming up, I've seen the demographics shift.
Right.
And I like to say that the demographics for the Pinehurst Gazette include everyone in Moore County. We feature the local businesses, the local nonprofits. We have a family fun page. We have a health and fitness page. So as it's a quality generational read, the oldest
Right.
community publication outside of the pilot.
Right.
People look for it and love it for its longevity in the marketplace.
Right.
But as I'm, a mom and a local resident and my children coming up, I try to include everyone.
Right.
So, and you mentioned the golf. We have, I have several contributors who write for me.
Right.
So we have the golf pro at the resort, Eric Albenfels, who writes, and I try to capture all demographics.
And I can attest that you do.
Right.
And you have a great, interview style, and you have a great presence when you go and you speak to people. The thing that strikes me is that in our day and age, I remember every day in the 70s and 80s, every morning, like clockwork, I would buy a USA Today. If I were having breakfast, I would pick up a newspaper. Mm-hmm. And I had a friend who was in the paper supply business from Canada. And I said to him one day, I said, eventually newspapers are going to kind of fall by the wayside because everything is going to wind up being electronic. And he looked at me like I was from Mars. And I'd take no value in being right, but hard papers are so hard to come by in this digital age where people are reading everything online. So you're up against, it's kind of counterculture a little bit.
It is difficult, yes, to go from, to transition into the digital age for print.
Right.
But I feel that this community, we have a lot of readers.
You do.
And the gazettes disappear off the stands, and people respond to it. And the way that I have included the digital age is we have a website.
Right.
And the Gazette issues are online.
Right.
And we have a Facebook page that's active and vibrant.
Right.
So we've tried to embrace the digital age, and that helps the advertisers too, who are looking for the next step in digital presence. Whereas if they purchase an ad, their ad continues.
Right.
Right.
So not only do you do the writing, the marketing, the advertising, where you go out into the marketplace, you also, and your boys, you do the distribution.
Yes.
How many drop-off points do you have in Moore County?
We have over 70 drop-off points, and I cover all of Moore County from Robbins to Pine Bluff, to north to south, and Cameron, Vass, all the exterior, Seven Lakes, West End, and of course Southern Pines, Pinehurst, and Aberdeen. I represent all of the towns.
We try so hard when we have someone like you come on to talk to the new generations that are moving into Moore County that might not be familiar with it. So where can the Gazette be picked up? What type of locations?
Yes, I have stands in all of the local post offices. I'm in all of the libraries. I'm at the Chamber of Commerce and several visitor centers, welcome centers. And all of the businesses who advertise with me have a collection of gazettes.
Yeah. We spoke a couple of weeks ago at my office, and one of the things we both said was, we both like to write. and we kind of have started doing it indirectly, me and my business, and you obviously now by picking up the Gazette. At the time, before you purchased the Gazette, what were you doing?
Yes, I was a full-time homeschool mom, raising my family. So I was a career mom, and I always had dreams of writing. So I have the goal and dreams of writing books, and I would always write the Christmas letter and do some writing on the side. But full-time, I was a mom, wife and mom.
But right now you have your ear to the ground so much in Moore County that you, we kind of share that in common, where we try to talk a lot about Moore County, on the show. And you're all wrapped up in all things Moore County.
Yes, I love Moore County. It is home.
Right. I did not know you grew up and did you go to high school here too?
I did.
Oh my gosh.
I did.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Born and raised here.
I did not know that. There's no cost for the Gazette?
Correct.
So you are, this is just out there as a service to residents at all the different places you just mentioned. What is the most, or what is one of the most prophetic stories, or one about owning the Gazette and writing? Anything that comes to mind that really says, you know what, I did the right thing, and there's a reason why I'm doing this, and there's a reason why I'm here?
That's a difficult question.
And you could say you have a bad cold and you can't answer it.
I feel totally inadequate for this position, but as I said, it's a complete privilege because this is home. I love it. I've chosen to raise my children here.
Right.
And I feel so honored to be able to have a small part in preserving the history and in giving back to the local organizations, helping local people. And I feel so privileged and honored to be able to meet the local business owners who are making this community the most beautiful place on earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, the business owners are unbelievable, amazing people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well said. I've met your boys, and I can tell you that the experience that they're getting in these formative years, this is something they'll never forget, wherever they go. I
hope so. And the greatest thing about as you are in the community doing interviews and meeting the people who are changing lives and making this place wonderful, as I get to go home and I share with them. So I feel like each interview is actually like reading a biography, because we start, at the beginning and continue through the end, and the business owners share their life experiences and their advice, and in turn I'm able to go home and say, look, boys, you get to learn this firsthand, all the, good and bad.
The other thing we hadn't touched on, and I do want to do this before we close, is it's a very cost-effective vehicle for advertising for local businesses, because the publication comes out quarterly. You've got a 3-month run, and people pick this up from all different walks of life, so the messages can get out to a lot of people for a very efficient advertising dollar.
Yes, thank you. So I could always use more advertisers, and my advertisers are the best, and they're the ones who make it happen, because without my local advertisers, I couldn't produce or publish and offer this as a, it's a free publication to the consumer, but the advertisers make it happen. So once again, the local mom and pops who make this community happen, they are the backbone, and I truly appreciate them, because without them, I couldn't do what I do.
Yeah. Well, I've been trying to get you to come on and talk, and I finally got you here, and I hope you're glad you came. The Pinehurst Gazette, their byline is covering more one neighbor at a time, and I do think that covers a lot of what you do. There are stories, there are maps, there are always going to be bits and pieces of history of Pinehurst and Moore County in general, and there's so much for people, especially the people who are moving into the area, the younger generations, for them to pick up and learn, just to get a better perspective on Moore County. And you're kind of like at the forefront of that.
Thank you.
And I know we'll see you in different ways down the road this year in 2019.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Rebekah King, the Pinehurst Gazette, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be back in the second set, and we'll be speaking with Friesen and Friend to Friend, and all about the topic and subject of human trafficking and what it means here in Moore County, not just somewhere else that you read about and go, oh, that happened somewhere else. It's an issue in Moore County that we're going to have a great discussion on. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our second set of All Things Moore County, and I'm privileged to welcome Ann Friesen, who is the Executive Director of Friend to Friend, and Jan Mullis, who is the Human Trafficking Community Educator here in Moore County. Ann has been a guest on the show in the past, and Ann, it seems like every time you've come on, we've spoken about human trafficking. And people sometimes in our day and age, they look at the news and they hear about these horrific things that happen, but it's always in Colorado or Texas or Oklahoma. Human trafficking is a problem in Moore County. Friend to Friend is an organization that is dedicated to helping victims, both of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. That all goes hand in hand, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Friend to Friend works with any victim of interpersonal violence. So that could be sexual violence, physical violence, emotional violence. So human trafficking is really that intersection between physical and sexual violence. And so we have survivors. The majority of our survivors that come to seek our services are domestic violence or sexual assault, and a small number are human trafficking clients. So I don't want to, create a feeling that there is a huge problem here in Moore County. Friend to Friend is trying to be very proactive and educate and train our citizens and kind of in a community watch mentality so that we are an environment where traffickers do not want to be coming into our community to have this issue.
And human trafficking, just to make it clear, people come in and they prey on younger or kids in their formative years that are very impressionable?
Yes, it can be, or it can be adults that are being coerced or, controlled to do these issues. And I'd love to invite Jan to talk a little bit about this. She's really the expert in human trafficking and has a lot more detailed information.
Jan, there are a lot of people we've had on in the past who specialize in mentoring, who have gone into the schools and spoken to kids and always trying to keep kids on the straight and narrow so that they learn to make good choices and not fall into trouble, fall off the tax rolls, drop out of school. But this issue is a little bit different, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Human trafficking is a hidden crime. And the reason that it's a hidden crime is because it is based the youth that are involved in human trafficking get lured into the crime. And the luring takes place by relationships. And the traffickers will target these youth through the internet mainly.
Through the internet.
So when they approach a youth, they already know a lot about them. They know if they've had a fight with their boyfriend, or they've just broken up with their boyfriend, or if they've had a fight with their parents, or if they've been wanting to go to the beach and their parents won't take them. So they know something about them. And then they use that to lure them into a relationship with themselves. And that's one reason why it's called a hidden crime, and it's one reason why we need the community to help fight it.
So social media, the internet, this is really the underside of, I mean, there's so many benefits to it, but this is definitely not one of them.
Right.
Are these stalkers?
Yes. You ask about the vulnerability of the age group. The average age for a youth to get involved in it is 14. The targeted age is 11 to 25. And the reason being, I think a couple of reasons for that is this is the age where these youth are getting some freedom, and they're not quite sure how to use that freedom. But beyond that and on into the adult level, as Ann was referring to, is a vulnerability to just being loved. And these traffickers offer what I refer to as counterfeit love. They give the appearance like they really care about their victims.
Right.
And by the way, most people think of this being a problem for girls, but the boys are targeted as well. So it is a problem for all of us, and we're all vulnerable to being loved.
Are
And
in your experience, are the majority of stalkers men?
They can be men and women. They
Right.
can present themselves as a boyfriend who really falls in love with a girl, or they can present themselves as a girlfriend who cares about a girl. Now, a lot of the youth that are the most vulnerable are those that have or would be considered high risk, who have a need for just needs of life, food and clothing. However, all of them are vulnerable, and it's because that they offer this love. And so we have to look at all of our community as far as providing protection for them.
So if you look at the petri dish of dysfunction that creates this scenario, economic, social, broken families,
Right.
Single-parent families.
Right.
So is there a prescription? Is there a diagnosis that you could say this person is at very high risk because the common denominators are all very similar?
Well,
it depends, right?
Yes, it does. I hate to say that only certain people are high risk,
Right.
because that used to be the case historically in human trafficking, but very quickly that is changing, and it is human trafficking cuts across all barriers: economic, social. Every one of our youth is vulnerable to it.
Where do you go to speak to? Do you go into the schools?
I have been into some schools. We're really wanting to get it in front of more youth right now, so we're trying very hard to go into the schools in a broader fashion. I've spoken to churches, youth groups at churches, community organizations. We have held, Friend to Friend has held, we've the last 3 quarters of this past year, we have had a community presentation each quarter for the community at large. And so one thing we did when we first started focusing on trafficking is that we sat down and we said, who needs to be trained, educated on recognizing this crime? And we came up with 4 different groups, and one is the youth themselves. They really are the only ones that can protect themselves, because we as adults can't be with them all the time. So they need to recognize the signs for themselves. The other is are people that have a relationship with these youth, like counselors, parents, grandparents, teachers,
Right.
youth pastors, so that they can help watch for the signs. Because oftentimes, like I say, because they're being lured by this counterfeit love, they can get emotionally involved in it, so that they just miss the signs altogether.
Right.
So we hit heavy when we're working with the youth on helping your friends. Watch for your friends as well as yourself. But so that's that group, and then the another group is the community at large, and this is what we've been focusing on the last few months, and that is just training the community to see the signs of a trafficker. And it is a community problem, as Ann has said when we first started working. It's a community problem, and it's going to take the community to solve it.
The cell phone generation, these new age smartphones, they are almost like lethal in terms of making it a very slippery slope for communication. It's very easy to get in touch with these people, with the kids, right?
One thing that's been really blown it wide open are these games that you play on the cell phones where you interact with other people. So the traffickers know that, and that's one way they get in and start building these relationships with these kids. So then they have a relationship before they ever approach them for the first time. But one thing that we don't want to lose sight of is also the, and we hit this real solidly when we're working with the youth. Your cell phone can be your best friend or it can be your worst enemy.
Right.
And so we help them to see the difference. And I'll tell you a quick story.
It doesn't have to be quick. Take your time.
About the phone being, a wonderful tool for them. I did training with a group of high schoolers, and 2 weeks after the training, she observed a younger child being lured into a car with 3 older boys, and she couldn't get to her fast enough to keep her from getting in. But she did remember in our training that we had talked about your phone being your best friend, and she pulled her phone out and took a picture of the license plate.
Oh.
And immediately called the police, and they had that little girl back in less than 2 hours.
Wow.
And the police did tell us later that that was a trafficking issue right here in Moore County. That happened in Southern Pines. And that little girl was saved from a very horrible life.
Were you, or are you a teacher?
I was a teacher. I started out my career years ago teaching high school.
Okay.
Then I stopped to have a family, and then when I went back to work, I was in corporate training for a number of years. And then I retired from that, and then got involved in trafficking. When I learned about trafficking, I just knew I had to do something. It was just so horrible that, and such a blight on our society, and a danger for our youth, that age group that I had loved to work with when I first started out. And so I just transferred those skills into this position that I'm working in now.
Kids today face a whole different set of rules and regulations than kids when you were teaching high school.
Absolutely.
And
I was just going to mention one thing that people ask often is, I never hear about the stories like Jan just shared. And I think it's really important to know that the laws prohibit, anytime there's a sexual assault, that case is sealed, especially if there's a child involved. And so even there are a lot of sexual assaults that the paper or the media don't pick up on because that case is sealed for the being victim-centered. And so we do have these human trafficking cases that you don't hear about, and so therefore a lot of the public think that it doesn't exist, and that's because the victim-centered approach, keeping their confidentiality so that the law enforcement can investigate, and and because when there's children involved, then obviously even in those cases it's not shared with the public. So there are many instances like that, and that is why we're trying to sort of have a community watch campaign. Back in the 70s, neighborhoods would put a sign and say, this sign is a community watch. And that
Right.
would sort of deter crime from happening in that neighborhood. And we're trying to do that same premise with, don't come here, traffickers. We are watching, and we know what to look for.
At Friend to Friend, do you see in the last 3 or 4 years this problem it's there, it's growing? Are you trying to help put a lid on it, or just increase awareness so other people are creating a set of eyes as well?
Well, we're doing a many-prong approach. So we have an amazing sheriff's department and local law enforcement that are committed. They see that the gang activity has increased in Moore County, and so gangs and trafficking and drugs are all interrelated.
Yeah.
And so we have a task force, Friend to Friend helped found. We work closely with Maureen Kruger, the district attorney. She's our co-chair.
Yep.
And so we meet as a group so that all first responders that might pick up a trafficking case know how to deal with the victim, know what to look for. And so that, we deal with it from the law enforcement side. And then Jan has even gone into the hospital and helped train nurses and then nurses to be at Sandals Community College nursing program so that everybody knows what to look for. and the difference, which is crucial because a lot of victims don't self-identify as a human trafficking victim.
Right.
They know that they've been sexually assaulted, or they know the situation, but they don't
have the label.
They don't have the language, and so we need folks to be able to help them.
You've said this is the fastest growing crime in the U.S.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think if you ask people that question, they would never put that near the top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's organized crime because when you, it has surpassed drugs because when you are organized crime and you have to spend money to buy cocaine and then you sell it, there's an investment. Whereas trafficking, you can pick people up and there's not a huge investment and you can use them over and over and over again. So it's a lucrative business, unfortunately, and so it is growing in popularity. I think it's now the second highest organized crime, whereas it used to be the third. North Carolina is a top 10 state for trafficking, primarily because we have highways. We're an agricultural state. What is the third one?
Military.
Oh, military, and we have military bases.
So I misspoke perhaps at the opening. It's not. You focus on the big problem, not just through Moore County's eyes.
Correct.
But it exists in Moore County, but perhaps not in the same way as it does in other parts of the state.
Yes, and I think it's
Okay.
primarily because we have a real community that people know each other. They're looking out for each other. We also have an amazing law enforcement. We have an incredible education programs where school social workers are getting trained. They're committed to helping keep their students safe. And because of that, I think we, are in a good advantage for that.
Yes.
One thing
Jan.
that it's good to know is that it is a worldwide crime,
Yeah.
but it occurs locally.
Yeah.
And in the U.S. anyway, it started out in the big cities, and it is quickly moving to the smaller towns like ours. For one reason is that the police have learned better how to deal with it in the larger cities. They have thrown resources at it and have technology and all to use, whereas the smaller areas don't have those resources. And one thing that is amazing to me, the more I got in and learned about human trafficking, is these traffickers are smart. I mean,
Yeah.
they're very smart,
Yeah.
and that's one reason why we feel so committed to the Community Watch program, is because it is a hidden crime. If they know that somebody is onto them, they move on. Because we just heard a couple of weeks ago, one of the first cases that was tried in Fayetteville, the trafficker got 132 years. So the federal laws are coming down hard on trafficking, and one reason for that is that the money from trafficking pays for the majority of terrorism in the world. And so this is one reason that the governments from around the world have come together to fight human trafficking.
As a layman, is it just me? I don't see a lot of articles written about it. You get in the morning, or you go online and you read whatever portal you're reading. I don't see topics about trafficking.
That's absolutely true. We're really on the frontier because this is a new epidemic,
Okay.
and we're recognizing that, and so that's why we're trying to equip. We're really becoming a model, a friend to friend in the programming that we're coming up with, and other communities, particularly rural communities, are using what we're doing as a model. Also, Cumberland County is a few steps ahead as far as law enforcement because they have designated investigators for human trafficking, and we've brought them to our task force to share what's worked and what's not worked. So we're really collaborating, trying to get a handle on this, but this is an effort to kind of start getting the word out. In January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, so we're doing a big push with that. I also personally started a website called the Human Trafficking Source because I discovered there really isn't a virtual portal or library for people, even students, to go and just research the latest.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that will be an place where when people do research. Jan may be working on a book that they have a platform that they could put it there so that when people are looking for the latest human trafficking information, this is another place they can go.
What, the website address?
It's the www.thehumantraffickingsource.com.
Okay, that's good to know. We'll definitely post that. Going back to the petri dish of all the things that go into a situation that can become dysfunctional. We talked about the economic, the social, broken family, drugs. But the common denominator of all of that is self-esteem, right? I mean, however the self-esteem is knocked down for any of those reasons, if that didn't exist, it would be a problem.
And that's where the community comes in.
Okay.
And I like to put it in part of training the community is releasing. I mean, we are a great community, as Anne has referred to. And to release that and to be able to be conscientious about showing authentic love, especially to our youth and that age group that is so vulnerable. And I also like to share with the adult groups that I talk with that anytime you're doing anything like the backpack program, mentoring program, anything like that, you are fighting human trafficking at the same time for just this reason you're talking about is building self-esteem.
Right.
But I'll share with you one part of our training with the youth that we do with the youth. We talk about 2 weeks of is spent on how to love yourself. And this is really just another way of saying self-esteem.
Right.
But I'm always amazed when I throw that out there for the first time. The number of youth say, I never knew it was all right to love myself. I've always been taught that I had to share and you know, give to everybody else. And so we spend quite a bit of time talking about what's the difference between authentic love, which is a healthy type of love for yourself, and the counterfeit love, which the traffickers use, but we also can use that on ourselves when we become self-centered and selfish.
Right.
And so we spend quite a bit of time on that issue just because of what you just said.
Part of the selfie generation. The pictures that they take, the pictures that they post. I don't know that there's a whole lot of joy and satisfaction at the end of the day from them putting themselves out there, but it's sort of like keeping up with the Joneses, but it's a tough way to live, unless it comes from within, right? Everything seems to be outward.
Right.
Well, and those pictures that are taken can also be used against them. We've had some cases where a young, attractive male will be working with a gang, and he'll pose as a boyfriend and invite a girl to come to a party, and then she will be gang raped. They will videotape it on a phone, and they'll say, I'm going to share this with your minister or your parents or your friends if you don't continue to do what we say. So it can be a really horrific, tool to use. And this is part of empowering the women and the young girls and the young men to, know that this happens. It's happened in our community, and we need to be buddy system looking out for each other. If there's youth drinking, just like when we have designated drivers, have designated friends that are watching out for everybody. So if you see someone trying to lure somebody out of the party into a car, you step in and say, I don't think so. Things like that, little tools that give people permission and let them be a little more proactive in their defense and safety.
Jen.
I'll share another story with you that came out of a group I recently worked with of youth. And we were working on this. We were talking about this subject of loving yourself and the difference between how you feel when you're doing things, like you say, outside of yourself to try to make yourself feel good, and when it comes from the inside. And so we had been talking about that, and one of the girls in the class had been very quiet. She was usually very talkative, and so at the end I said, so what have you all learned today? And everybody was sharing, and she was still very quiet, and I started to move on, and all of a sudden she said, I learned that I pimped a girl. Well, I had never had that experience before, and kind of took me aback. And I said, well, how did that make you feel?
Yeah.
And she was all, oh, that was nice getting that money, you know, blah, blah. She was acting all macho.
Huh.
And I just listened, and then I asked her, I said, how did it make you feel on the inside?
Uh-huh.
And she thought a minute, and she said, it didn't make me feel very good at all. And I just was silent a minute and let her think and get in touch with what she was really feeling. And and she looked up and she said, I don't think I'll do that again. I said, I think that's a good idea.
That was a good coachable moment.
Mm-hmm.
Good for you.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to come back in the third set. Our conversation is all about human trafficking. We're with Ann Friesen, the Executive Director of Friend to Friend, and Jan Mullis, the Human Trafficking Community Educator. This is All Things Moore County. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our third and final set. I wish we had more time because this topic can go on and there's so many different facets to it. But and I'm talking about human trafficking. But and at Friend to Friend, there's a lot I'd like you to share about the group, the organization, and its relationship and to human trafficking and everything else that you do.
Okay, well, Friend to Friend was started by a small group of Moore County citizens over 30 years ago. So we have helped thousands and thousands of Moore County citizens that are fleeing from abuse. Our mission is to help survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking rebuild their lives. And so these supportive services take many forms. We have a crisis line at 24 hours a day. Someone can call, and it might be somebody who just had gotten beaten up, their children are asleep, and they're not sure what the issues are. They just know they need help. So we can connect them with services, or we can invite them to come stay at our Serenity House shelter, which is a 34-bed shelter that women and their children can stay up to 3 months. And this really helps support them in their fleeing from the abuse, and helps them become self-sufficient by helping them find jobs, save money for their first down payment for supportive housing, get some tutoring for their children, counseling. So it's really amazing. And so we're really proud of that. We also have a court advocacy program so that if you need a restraining order, maybe you don't need shelter, but you need protective, that's all free of charge. They can come to our office in Carthage. We also, anytime there's a rape or sexual assault, and the sheriff brings them to the hospital, or they walk into the hospital ER, the head nurse will call our crisis line, and we'll provide a free trained sexual assault advocate to help them navigate the rape kit and all the things that are going to happen during that ER visit. So we help in many, many ways. I think it's really helpful to have a little idea of just the scope of work we do. Last year, in 2018, we provided over 7,000 days of care and shelter meals. That's just in 1 year. And we're really proud that in 2018, 71% of the women that came to our shelter left in finding supportive, safe shelter, permanent housing. Right. And that's huge. So that was really wonderful. And when I say supportive housing, it may not be permanent housing. It may be reconnecting with a loved one or finding an apartment, but they're not going back to the abuser. We're talking about human trafficking specifically, and just for between 2017 and 18, it's a 600% increase in human trafficking activity as far as phone calls and folks staying at our shelter, and our crisis calls increased 65% in comparison to 2017. So we received 457 more calls in 2018 on our crisis line than we did in 2017.
So if things are increasing the way they are, so then begs the question, what would have happened if Friend to Friend was not there?
That's right. So we're a community program. We really need community support.
Right.
We're a nonprofit. All of our services are free. So we are so very, very blessed to have community partners. United Way helps support us, and we're so grateful for them.
Right.
We have individual donors. People will just send checks to, or go online on our website, friendtofriend.me, and maybe donate $25, $50, but all that adds up, and it helps us keep our doors open for any Moore County citizen who needs help.
Fundraising is a challenge, and it's, United Way fills a big void.
They do.
do you do different benefits as well during the year?
Well, this Tuesday we're having our biggest fundraiser. We have a luncheon in January. We're having a trafficking survivor come be our guest speaker from Atlanta, Lainey George, who's wonderful. And that's our biggest fundraiser. And then in April, for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we have a fun run, and that's at the Southern Pines Brewery. It's the last Friday in April.
Good.
And people can go on our friendtofriend.me website and find out all the information. They can donate. A lot of the information on the Thousand Eyes campaign, which Jan will talk briefly about, is there. So more information can be found on our website.
And that website is?
www.friend.me, M-E.
Jan?
Yes.
There are some, how did you hook up with Friend to Friend? Was it through meeting Anne? How did the connection happen? Because
Anne and I were, I've been in Pinehurst for 13 years.
Okay.
And Anne was one of the first persons that I met when I moved to town. And we were in a Bible study together.
Okay.
And so we just kept in touch over the years. When she went to lead Friend to Friend, we kind of both went our separate ways as far as time spent to each other, but we kept in touch. And about a year before I went to work with Friend to Friend, I really felt led to get involved in human trafficking. And so I did and started doing some just teaching of small groups on my own and let Anne know what I was doing. And so when Friend to Friend got a grant that would allow them to have a human trafficking communicator, she called me. And it was a perfect match as far as, the relationship that she and I had, and then letting me have an opportunity to work with the human trafficking.
So when Anne stands in something, right, and it's credible, and that increases her wingspan, doesn't it? And the people that are inside her circle will get drawn to it. I mean, it's a gift.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. We're not talking about her like she's not here, but...
Well, I will say it's really a team, though. I mean, I can't stress that enough. This takes a huge team of people, and our advocates are just so amazing. They're just so committed to the mission. They are, victim-centered, trauma-informed, and work, many hours. Saturday, we're having this, community education for young girls and their mothers to help equip them. And so we just have an amazing team. And I think that's key to be able to really fight and to help advocate people in crisis to move from crisis to confidence.
Your nature is, you don't like the spotlight on you. I get it completely. But that's also a gift, too. You just look around and it's not about her, it's about everybody else. And people get drawn by that. So people can go on your website, they can read a lot about the history, the statistics are numbing.
Yes.
I mean, they're not, and then I think to myself, even with community support, raising dollars has got to be like a constant challenge. Some of it is, it's not the most socially, like people don't go, oh yeah, let's have a meeting and talk about these issues. It's not so socially acceptable, or it's difficult. You're kind of flying under the radar a little bit, but you're fighting hard.
Right. And I think, we really try to focus on, it's really helping keep our children and our residents safe. It's about safety.
Yeah.
And so people can often, get interested in that, supporting safety for people, just basic human rights to be able to live without being abused.
Yeah. Moore County, we've spoken about it in the past. It's a tale of two counties. There are great pockets of comfort and wealth, and there are pockets where not so much. And you've got to cater to all portions of the community. And these problems are, it's like a microcosm of the country. It really is. But everyone who lives in the southern part of Moore County, and it's so inculcated and insulated, they think everything is so fine. Not always.
Right. And we have people coming to the shelter from all socioeconomic gated communities.
Yeah,
really,
I bet you do.
You have folks from all walks of life that have these issues. And so we're so grateful to be here because we're wanting people to know about our services. So if they have somebody they work with that are struggling with this, they can tell them, call friend to friend. They can help.
We want to, thank you for coming on. We spoke with Rebekah King in the first set about the new demographics and the new generations moving into town who might not be aware of friend to friend. And hopefully that this kind of interview will make them aware that these organizations are here in Moore County to help people of all ages. And I wish you both the best this year, 2019. And it's fighting a good fight, but it's a tough fight. But without you here, who would know? It could just run rampant. Jen?
One thing...
I love how she asks permission to talk with her hand. She's a teacher.
One thing that I have found about human trafficking, as horrible as it is, I have always been a person that has believed that good can come out of anything.
Yeah.
And when I first started working with human trafficking, I had that really tested. But one thing that we are seeing in working, whether it's with our task force or me out in the community with all different types of people and age groups, is that trafficking is breaking down a lot of walls. When you said Moore County is being too separate, it's breaking down a lot of walls because it impacts all of us.
Right.
And every group that I work with, when they find out about it, they want to know what they can do. And so it's that old saying, I guess, a common enemy can bring you together.
I hope
certainly we
our
need
politicians are listening to that in Washington.
Yes.
Guys, thank you both. Jan Mullis, thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure to meet you. And Ann, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. We're so grateful to be here. Thank you.
Anytime. Friend to friend. It's a wonderful organization in Moore County. Everybody have a great week. Thank you.